Hello and welcome to Sky Career Talks, where we display why it's great to learn with us and communicate. I'm your host, David James. Today, I'm super excited to be speaking with Jessica Castle Smith. Jessica is a 2008 graduate of Rutgers University and a 2011 graduate of the master's program here at Sky. Today, she is known as a results-driven, decisive communications leader who has more than 15 years of experience creating and executing strategic communication programs to drive business goals. She is currently a director of corporate and product communications at the Janssen Pharmaceutical Companies of Johnson & Johnson, where she is responsible for elevating the reputation of the company's oncology business and leading communication and public affairs strategies for the company's fastest growing portfolio. She has worked across Johnson & Johnson's corporate, pharmaceutical, and medtech businesses and has experience in multiple communications specialties, including employee communications and change management, executive communications and counsel, media relations, public affairs, and issues management. Jessica has also held roles of increasing responsibility since she's joined Johnson & Johnson as a corporate communications fellow in 2009. Prior to joining the company, she worked with the New York Yankees as a communications specialist for Legends Hospitality. We hope you'll enjoy this informative chat. We now present to you my interview with Jessica Castle Smith. So thank you for taking the time to be here with us, Jessica. Before we begin, I want to ask, how are you today?
Doing great. Thank you, and happy to be here.
So to kick us off, give us a brief overview of your career journey.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start, I know we're talking to people kind of from all over, right? So, some college students, some people have graduated, some people who are, kind of figuring out where they are. So I'll start kind of at the beginning. I did my undergrad at Rutgers, and I majored in communication and English. I didn't really know what exactly I wanted to do, but I was like, I knew that I liked writing and I liked talking to people. And I was like, what job is that? Right. So I actually was able to secure a job as a communications specialist for, at the time, it was the company that did the food, beverage, and merchandise for what was the new Yankee Stadium. There was an old Yankee Stadium and now they're all in the new one. Which was really cool. So I did that for about 15 months or so after I graduated. But I really felt like it wasn't quite the right fit. And so I wanted to look for something else to do. And I was always a person who I didn't want to go to school to go to school to go to school. I never thought I would actually go and get my master's. But I was looking and I was like, well, I don't really want to have these 15 months be wasted. Why don't I go back? I'll get my master's. I'll, still work full time and I'll go to school full time. And I, went back and I got my master's degree at Rutgers. I started in the summer. And at the time, the dean of the program had an opening with a fellowship program at Johnson & Johnson. And I happened to score really high on the writing portion of my GREs, and they were looking for really strong writers for this program. And she remembered me from undergrad. So she nominated me for the fellowship, and I interviewed, and I was able to actually get a fellowship position throughout my, graduate degree while I was getting my graduate degree at Rutgers. And so I worked at Johnson & Johnson Corporate in New Brunswick. And I first started doing work talking about our corporate social responsibility. And, it was a really great way to learn about the company. It was also a really great way to kind of fall in love with the company, because why wouldn't you want to talk about all the great things that, your organization is doing, right? So the good thing about the fellowship is, you work 20 hours a week and then you go to school, the other time, and there's a stipend and everything's great. But they don't actually secure a job placement for you after those 2 years, right? And so I had to run kind of a mini PR campaign for myself at Johnson & Johnson to try to secure a full-time position after I finished my master's and was done with the fellowship. And so luckily I was able to do that. So I started working, in May, right after I graduated, graduated with my master's, and I spent probably the first 5 or so years of my career in internal and organizational communications. So talking to our employees, making sure they were informed about all the things we were doing, employee intranet systems, things like that, running kind of major town hall meetings, et cetera. And then I was able to move into our Janssen Pharmaceuticals business. So I worked in field communications, so communicating to our field sales representatives, so pharmaceutical sales reps, and then also moved to do some work in our Janssen North America business, which I was running senior leadership forums and doing executive communications, et cetera. And then I was like, okay, I have this really good basis of internal organizational executive communication experience. I need to round that out with external experience. So I was able to move into doing product communications in our Janssen business. So I basically moved kind of every 2 years in my career. I've been at Johnson & Johnson as a fellow since 2009. I was able to, secure my kind of full-time position in 2011. So had a close to a 14-year career at Johnson & Johnson. Like I said, I've moved every 2 years, roughly. I spend so I was at corporate, I was at Janssen in our pharmaceuticals business, and then I spent a little bit of time over in our med tech business, which is, sutures and hip and knee replacements, et cetera, talking about those things. And now my job is back in pharma. So I am the communications director for one of our oncology medications. It's a blood cancer medication. And then I'm also responsible for our president of the US oncology business, all of his executive communications, executive leadership positioning, thought leadership, as well as our organizational communications for that business. So I kind of took, my career path was internal comms, and then I moved to external comms, and now I do both of those things. So it's been really great. I really love the organization. I'm kind of a J&J lifer, as they say, but it's been a great career path so far, and I'm definitely looking forward to what the future holds.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. Being able to be at a company over 14, 15 years, but being able to have that flexibility, right, to move around, do different positions, do internal communication, then do external communication. I'm curious, what does a normal day look like for you, as no 2 days are the same?
Well, that's the thing. No 2 days into communication are ever the same, right? I would say that, it really does depend on what we're doing. We have some kind of programmatic activations that we do on a daily and yearly basis that we're planning for, right? So we have things like sponsored content stories that we're telling about our patients, right? I have things like, I know a town hall meeting is coming up for our executives. So planning and writing around those types of things. But then there's also the things that you can't plan for, right? I do a lot of issues management sometimes. So I also do a lot of work with the media. So we'll get a media inquiry on something, and I'll have to kind of respond quickly. So I would say that communications is really all about being able to have a lot of plates spinning in the air, and kind of, you've got 10 plates. Is there a plastic one I might be able to drop every now and then? That doesn't really matter because this one has to rise to the top, et cetera. You really have to be able to kind of work in a matrix environment and prioritize, and just make sure that you have a good sense of what the most important thing is that you should be working on right then and there. But I think that's part of what's so great about communications is you're never going to be bored, right? So you're always going to be on your toes, kind of ready to move and drive into action, which is a great thing. So I don't know that I really answered what a typical day is, because there isn't really such a thing as a typical day, but right. It's also, I do have meetings with people to kind of get alignment around the work that we're doing. We work with some agency partners, so I have to work with them as well. I have a lot of business partners that I work with too. So I'm responsible for essentially amplifying the work of our marketing teams, right? So if they have a campaign, they're really focused on, one kind of subset. I have to say, okay, so from a larger reputational perspective, here's where I think we can come in. So, there's a lot of work and coordination across the board to make sure that you're working with a lot of different people and, just different personalities and everything too, which is interesting. Like I said, it's a lot of talking to people and writing, like I thought back when I was still in college.
And communication isn't one thing, right? Because at one moment you could be handling crisis and be problem solving, and then another moment be communicating with the media channels, but also figuring out the right campaign to speak to the stakeholders, but also kind of seeing it from a reputational management perspective.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think one of the things I would say to people who are younger in their career is try to be a generalist, right? Try to learn and get the skills, you know, in every area, and then kind of figure out what you like the best, right? So my job right now, I have to be a generalist. I have to know a little bit about everything. I was previously in a media relations role where my whole job was just talking to the media, right? So that's kind of very one silo of communications, and you can do that. I think a good career path, you'll have a generalist role, and then you'll have a more kind of you know, linear role that is really much more focused on one kind of aspect of communications. And if you can switch between those types of roles throughout your career path, I think that will really help you have an appreciate, you know, learn more, but also have an appreciation for what you might want to be working on too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think great communicators are really keeping track of, the news, the what's coming in that day or that week, breaking news, having those 24/7 feed updates, but also paying attention to trends, but also trying to communicate the best way, in J&J working with pharmacists, scientists, and then finding ways how to communicate that data in a very simplistic way where the public and stakeholders will be able to synthesize that information and be able to understand.
Exactly. I mean, it's definitely that too, right? I mean, we're speaking to different audiences. I mean, we sometimes we're speaking to patients, you know, so we do have to kind of synthesize that information. It's interesting. You know, sometimes folks might argue that when we're talking to doctors, or we're talking to the media on behalf of like a trade media organization, that really that outlet is really much more targeted towards healthcare professionals or doctors. They'll be like, well, we're writing for doctors, so it can be kind of complicated. And I was like, well, you're writing for the media who's writing for doctors, right? So I think everybody can appreciate sort of a more layman's term way to kind of talk about things. And that's part of our challenge, right? We live in a very regulated environment in healthcare. And so we need to make sure that we can say things that people understand, but also are still compliant and, you know, kind of meet all of the FDA requirements for how we're talking.
Right. So to switch gears, I'm curious, what type of skills should students be leveraging now, both technical and interpersonal?
Yeah, I mean, I think early on in your career, I mean, for me as a communicator, I think even now, writing is really important, right? I've kind of mentioned that a couple of times. You know, and it's in some ways people may argue that now because technology is a little different and the way that we're communicating, it may not be quite as important. I would argue that it's still very, very important because let's say you're doing a video, you have to write the storyboard for that video. Like communicators are storytellers. And I think so it's really important that you are able to tell a clear and concise story no matter what you're doing. And I think that your writing will help you do that. So I think writing as a skill set is really, really important. I think public speaking as a skill set is very, very important, having that confidence. And then, you know, in terms of how you kind of present yourself, right? I think when you're more junior in your career, it's really important to have just kind of almost, I use the word like a with itness about you, right? Like that you're like, yep, got it. Like you are able to instill confidence in your manager that you either are going to be able to ask the right, you know, that you understand, or that you can ask the right questions to understand. And so it's really about making sure that you're very focused, that you are paying a lot of attention to detail where you can, you know, and that you're not expected to necessarily know everything, but that you know when to pull in management or when not to. And those things are kind of softer skills that are a little bit more difficult to teach. But, you know, once you're kind of in a corporate environment, you can kind of see how that all works. So J&J is very matrix. It's very nice, right? So it's a very J&J nice we talk about a lot of times, where you have to be a really good negotiator and a really good communicator to make sure that you're being clear about, you know, what you want to drive forward. I think also being able to kind of just be very action oriented and, you know, doing a lot of under promising and over delivering so that you're instilling confidence that you're really, the best person for the role, and that, oh, that person got that, said they were going to get it to me on Thursday, but they got it to me on Tuesday. That's amazing. I mean, you don't want to fake those things, but that stuff is really important and it really matters and goes a long way.
And for students who are wondering, how to break into this field, what's your perspective on networking, having a social media presence, having a LinkedIn presence, or even going as far as branding by having a website?
Yeah, I would say that I personally don't necessarily think that a website itself is really as necessary. I think it's a nice to have, but I think some of the kind of older school ways are still totally appropriate, right? So I think that for me, having an internship when you were in undergrad is incredibly important, right? One or more. I had one, which I didn't talk about in my career path, but I had one in my junior year. And that was part of what helped me get the fellowship because I had prior work experience, right? So that's really important. When I'm looking at resumes of people to hire right now, it's I think people are surprised to hear this, but I don't really look at what you did in school in terms of like your GPA or where you went to school. I look at the experience that you had. I look at, did you have an internship? What did you deliver? Your resume should not be a list of the things that you did. It should be a list of the deliverables that you were able to accomplish, the things that you were able to accomplish, right? So I think that that's very important, having a really strong resume that talks to your skills. And even if you are an undergrad and, you don't have a ton of job experience, if you have one or two internships, maybe some leadership positions, while you're in school, I think that can really go a long way. So internships are critically important. Networking is, I actually was talking with a colleague who's, similar years of experience as me. And we were talking about how your job is your job, right? But it also is your job to network. And it's not, oh, here's my job and then I'll network. It's you have to be doing both all the time, right? So you have to be networking, creating relationships, touching base with people, all of those things. And I understand that those things are not easy, right? I'm a very extroverted person. And even for me, I'm like, oh, I got to go to this networking thing. Like it's really kind of, it's a little uncomfortable. I don't really know that many people, et cetera, et cetera. But it's really important to put yourself out there because it definitely makes a difference. I mean, more and more your jobs are kind of unfortunately less about what you know and more about who you know and who knows of you, right? Can somebody put in a good word for you? All of those kinds of things are really important. I mean, the skills have to be there, right? The experience has to be there, but a lot of times it's relationships that will drive the opportunities.
And it's so crucial, even as communication majors, I like to think of as relationship building.
It
And it's
absolutely is. Yes. Yeah. It's interesting, it's some people think like, oh, I need a mentor, or I need an advocate, or I need sometimes those things are better if they just are organic, right? If it just happens to be a boss that you had who sees a lot of potential in you and can vouch for you. If it happens to be a coworker who is like, I've worked with this person and that's great. Or, it's easy to just send an email or a note to somebody and just say, hey, like, I'm interested in the work that you're doing. Can you spend a little bit of time with me to tell me more about it? I did that a lot when I was a fellow because I had this opportunity where I was in this organization with all of these people, and most people will be flattered and will want to help you. So as much as it might be a little bit awkward to send that email, it's easy to send an email and just say, well, hopefully they'll get back to me and we can set up that time. Now, the best thing you can do is be prepared for that meeting then. Ask them some questions, have some things prepared. Say, hey, can you tell me more about this? How did you get this career, path? I'm really interested in, I'm making it up, but media relations, right? Can you tell me more about that? Can I sit in on an interview that you're doing that isn't, super proprietary, right? To hear how that goes, those types of things. And that goes a really long way. And like I said, most people will want to help you.
So, to end, are there any lasting words of wisdom that you could provide students, or perhaps your younger self that you wish you knew?
I think it really is all about kind of, you do have to kind of create your own brand a little bit. you definitely have to, I think my biggest thing is probably find an advocate and be an advocate to somebody else. I think that kind of stuff really goes a long way. So, if you can have your work speak for itself, have your, have your drive, make sure that you're making those connections, but having an advocate and then being an advocate for somebody else is probably the best way to get ahead and pay it forward in any organization. And I think that has really done wonders for me, both having one and trying to be an advocate for other people. So I think that's some advice that I probably would give folks.
Very wise words, and I really appreciate being able to learn more about your perspective and insights, throughout your career journey. And it's been an honor being able to interview you today, Jessica.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. This was great. And hopefully it was helpful to people. I know it was probably a little long-winded, but hopefully there's some nuggets in there that are good for everybody. So thanks so
Yeah.
much for having me.
That again was my interview with Jessica Castle-Smith. We look forward to connecting with Jessica very soon. Thank you all for joining us for another edition of Sky Career Talks. And be sure to share, like, comment, and subscribe. Also follow our LinkedIn group page, Sky Career Corners, to connect with our brilliant students and alumni. Until next time, I'm David James. Take care.